We have a strong statement from Qatar, as you might imagine. They have issued a statement through their foreign ministry spokesperson, and this is certainly a very shocking development. Now, we have seen Israel targeting Hamas leadership in other countries. We have heard the Qatari Prime Minister. Now, Qatar has been one of the key mediators alongside Egypt and the United States.
Just hours before the strike, Qatari officials were seated with Hamas representatives, discussing proposals from the United States that could free hostages and pause the war. Hours later, smoke engulfed the same district, embassies, and schools just blocks away. The sudden shift from cautious optimism to fiery devastation stunned observers worldwide. But what you may not realize is that this wasn't just an attack on Hamas. It was an assault on Doha's role as the last trusted broker in this conflict. The story of that night exposes how diplomacy can collapse in seconds. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. How did Doha, a small Gulf capital often dismissed as a mere dot on the map, become the one place where Israel, Hamas, the United States, and Egypt could sit at the same table, even if never in the same room? The answer lies in a decision made more than a decade earlier.
That was on the table. So there were active negotiations between Hamas stationed in Doha and but in the past they have targeted them in Tehran, for example, in Syria, in the deeper past, in Jordan. But there has not been this kind of attack repeatedly from the Israeli Prime Minister that nobody in Hamas is safe and they will target them wherever they are.
When Hamas was quietly encouraged to set up its political bureau in Qatar in 2012. What seemed at first like a liability for the tiny state became one of its greatest tools of influence. Doha became the address where people who refused to acknowledge one another's existence could still pass messages, draft terms, and inch toward agreements. From the start, this arrangement was delicate. The United States gave its approval, knowing Qatar already hosted its largest military base in the region. Israel tolerated the move, calculating that it was better to have Hamas leaders housed under the watch of a U.S. ally than roaming through less predictable capitals. Qatar accepted the risk, believing it could raise its global standing as a trusted mediator. By doing so, Doha transformed itself from an energy-rich Gulf state, mostly known for wealth and airports, into a negotiating ground for issues that determined life and death. But how could one city keep cordial ties with Washington while also allowing Hamas to maintain a presence within its borders? That paradox defined Qatari diplomacy. On one side, it delivered billions in humanitarian aid for Gaza, paying salaries, keeping electricity running, and distributing basic supplies. On the other side, it promised Israel and America that none of this money would empower Hamas militarily. Doha became an accountant in a war zone, balancing ledgers no one else wanted to touch. This neutrality wasn't ceremonial, it was functional. When hostages were taken, whether soldiers or civilians, negotiators in Doha drafted releases. When ceasefires were needed, Qatari envoys coordinated nights of phone calls crossing between languages, capitals, and intelligence services. During the years of sporadic violence between Israel and Gaza, exchanges of prisoners were finalized with Qatari assistance. In several cases, agreements seemed to stall everywhere else, only to move forward once Qatari mediators stepped in with compromises acceptable enough to all sides. The contradiction grew sharper when looking at Qatar's public image. To the world, it was a polished hub of sports and diplomacy, proud host of global tournaments and trade forums. Beneath that glimmer, in quiet offices away from cameras, Hamas's political bureau operated. The same city where FIFA delegates drank coffee was the one where plans for ceasefires, prisoner swaps, and aid deliveries were worked out. A place tourists saw as safe and futuristic was simultaneously a vault containing one of the most controversial leadership groups in the Middle East. It raises an uncomfortable question. How sustainable could this system have been if Hamas leaders lived only a short distance from government ministries, embassies, and international schools? Every visiting leader, every foreign intelligence service knew their presence. It wasn't hidden. It was tolerated, managed, and woven into the fragile operating system of regional politics. And here lies the crucial point. This was not Qatar acting as a rogue state. The decision to host Hamas was coordinated and tolerated by both Israel and the U.S., because both saw long-term value in having channels of communication preserved under controlled circumstances. For over a decade, that uneasy bargain held, which makes what followed all the more dramatic. The illusion of stability, a stage-managed coexistence of hostility and diplomacy, collapsed in a single night when 15 Israeli jets roared over Doha and targeted a compound meant to be a safe house for political figures, shattering years of carefully balanced arrangements. What gamble makes a country risk bombing not just militants, but the very city trusted to broker peace? On the night of September 9, 2025, 15 Israeli fighter jets cut across Gulf airspace, aiming at a single target inside Doha. The raid was fast, precise, and devastating. 10 guided munitions ripped into a residential compound in the Qatari district, a place many residents associated more with embassies, cafes, and international schools than with clandestine meetings of militant leaders. Within seconds, smoke and fire consumed the building, the skyline of Qatar's capital glowing red as debris rained down. This was not a strike on a remote house in Gaza or an isolated bunker. It landed in the heart of a neighborhood that hosted diplomatic families, foreign security teams, and some of the most carefully protected facilities in the city. Streets where children walked to school by day were suddenly a war zone at night. The risk went far beyond destroying members of Hamas. It brought direct danger to diplomats, international workers, and civilians, stretching the impact of the strike far outside its intended target. Casualty reports broke quickly, but with contradictions. Hamas announced that 5 of its senior members had been killed, framing them as figures directly connected to ongoing talks. Other accounts claim 6 people died, including a Qatari security officer who had been assigned to guard the compound. The details shifted depending on the source, but the sense of confusion was unmistakable. For a mission that Israel advertised as precise, the outcome left both clarity and murk. Hamas wasted no time shaping the narrative. Its spokesman claimed the group's negotiation delegation survived, calling that survival a kind of victory. Within hours, statements told supporters that Israel had not just struck a building, but attempted to cripple the very diplomatic apparatus to organize prisoner releases and ceasefires. In their version, Israel's attack was not only against men, but against dialogue itself, proof that the opponent feared diplomacy more than rockets. Israel presented a completely different justification. The Prime Minister publicly linked the operation to perpetrators of the October 7th attacks, stating that the individuals targeted were responsible for past atrocities and remained an active threat. Israel argued it had exercised precision, that it had carefully timed and scoped the strike, and that taking full responsibility meant acknowledging a direct act of self-defense. To Tel Aviv's leadership, allowing those men to live openly in Doha was no different from leaving them armed on a battlefield. Yet reports later added a complication. Senior American officials revealed privately that Washington was told of the attack only when it was too late to intervene. The world's closest allies suddenly found themselves exchanging accusations of distrust. In Washington, some asked whether Israel had tried to bypass U.S. oversight, while in Jerusalem, leaders insisted timing was critical and secrecy necessary. That late notification became its own story, fanning speculation of hidden fractures in the alliance. Qatar's reaction was immediate and furious. Government officials called the attack a violation of sovereignty unlike anything seen in recent memory, promising legal consequences and framing it as a strike against international law. Officials declared that their capital had been treated like a battleground despite its role as a mediator, yet at the same time vowed not to abandon negotiations over hostages. Doha seemed determined to show fury to the attackers while staying visible to everyone still depending on mediation. The strike on Doha showed how fast the foundation of trust can collapse when a supposed safe ground turns into a battlefield. For years, Qatar functioned as a rare space where bitter rivals tolerated dialogue under cautious supervision. That space vanished in seconds. If even Doha, protected by U.S. bases and global diplomacy, can become a target, what ground is left for talks? This moment forces a choice: abandon negotiations as a failed experiment or strengthen them before the last channels close. The answer may decide whether lives are saved through words or lost through war.